We can see now, since we've been chief heat officers for the last couple of years, it has made an enormous difference. Our ability to bring people together within the organisation, to communicate publicly about the risks. So Melbourne realised it took a slight risk in taking on a new provocative title, but that risk has paid off.
Welcome back, everybody. Richard Baker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with leaders of sustainable organizations, be it government, corporate, nonprofit, academic, about the work they're doing. And through these conversations, I'm trying to inspire and equip the next generation of ambassadors, or the climate quitters who are looking at a way to make a jump into a new field around the issues that they are focused on. And so with that, I'm really excited to have Melbourne's chief heat officers and directors of climate change with us, Tiffany Crawford and Krista Milne, to talk about the work that they've been doing over the last 13 to 15 years there in that city to understand, address, and execute a number of programs and strategies on the challenges that are faced by the city, its people, and climate change in general. For them, they're focused on developing and implementing projects that build resilience to extreme heat, adapt infrastructure to less but more intense rainfall, enable renewable energy and zero carbon buildings. And I'm really looking forward to this because, as you know, through this podcast, we've been talking a lot about the impact of different ranges of temperatures to geographies, to cities, to communities. And I've yet to speak at the city level about how do you understand the world going forward, create strategy, and build resilience, adapt, and engage your communities along the way. Thank you very much to the both of you for taking the time to join the podcast, to join the community, and talk about the work that you're doing, and to share your insights and experience.
Hi, Richard. It's a
Looking
pleasure.
forward to it. Thank you.
All right. So as a starting point, it'd be great to have you both introduce yourselves and a little about the work that you're doing.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that warm welcome, Richard. So my name is Krista Milne. I've been at the city almost 15 years and playing a leadership role in sustainability and climate change mostly throughout that period. So what's the role of a chief heat officer? It's not a very common title around the world. I think there's about 12 of us now. And it's really our role here in Melbourne to raise our community's knowledge and awareness of the issue of extreme heat. Many people don't understand that heat is kills more people in the world and in Australia and in Melbourne than any other climate hazard. And so we really need to increase our community's knowledge about that risk. So that's the first big part. And then the second big part is to ensure that we're planning and making decisions across all of our city functions to integrate the consideration of heat into those decisions as the city is heating up due to climate change. Over to you, Tiff.
Thanks, Krista. Hi, I am Tiffany Crawford. I am the other half of what we're known as TISTA here at the City of Melbourne. We job share in our roles, which we've done for nearly 5 years now in the role of Director Climate Change and City Resilience, and then more recently as Chief Heat Officers, that position being added a couple of years ago, and I'll speak about that shortly. I've been with the city for nearly 20 years and have had the pleasure of working with Krista on many of our leading sustainability initiatives at the city, firstly as legal counsel and then now more recently as in a job share and various leadership capacities. And there's still so much to do, and we're really proud of the work that we and the teams have achieved. But look, in terms of the future, enormously excited about the challenges, also a little bit daunting, but together we know that we can make a difference.
That's great. So this is a new role for yourselves, but also, as was mentioned, there's only about 12, maybe. I saw one article was like 10 or the top 10 chief heat officers. When did Melbourne understand it needed chief heat officer or officers? And what was behind that decision? Like, you were both already directors of or co-directors of climate change. Like, what's the additional here? Like, what's the unique case for this title or for this office and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's been really interesting journey because we were already as a city working on heat resilience. So through our green infrastructure, through urban forestry, through our health departments, we were approached by the Adrian R. Rockefeller Foundation through their program of heat awareness and adaptation, recognising both the Lord Mayor's leadership in climate action and our reputation around the world for being really a vanguard city on climate action, but also recognising that Melbourne had the highest statistical prevalence of heat mortality than any other city in Australia. We took that to our city leadership and to our council, and they agreed that this made sense and that it was an opportunity looking ahead to the future for Melbourne to really double down on the climate work that we were already doing in order to prepare our city for a changing climate. And looking back, it's been a really interesting trajectory. We can see now, since we've been chief heat officers for the last couple of years, it has made an enormous difference. Just with the addition of that title, our ability to bring people together within the organisation, to communicate publicly about the risks. So yes, Melbourne realised it took a slight risk in taking on a new provocative title, particularly given that Melbourne is known as pretty cool, temperate climate, and there's lots of jokes about Melbourne's weather, but that risk has paid off.
Yeah, I would add that what's been so surprising is just really having that laser focus on heat has given us more cut through on the issue of climate change and the need to both reduce our impact and adapt to the future climate than ever before. We've been talking about adaptation and being, for a long time at the city, but really at that simple focus on something that because people experience it and they know that we're getting more hotter days. And, we had an intense bushfire summer right at the start of our role in this. It's really delivered benefits in terms of garnering attention to the issue of acting on climate.
And actually, in terms of more hotter days, what is the challenge of heat that you're seeing in Melbourne these days? And what's behind it? Like, how much of this is climate? How much of it is just what they call heat island effect? And how does it impact communities, or how does it impact the infrastructure itself?
Yeah, great question, Richard. Look, Melbourne, as I said, it's pretty cool a lot of the time, but when the heat comes, it's ferocious and unrelenting. So we'll have big spikes in temperature. We might have, pretty cool 25-degree days. Everybody's feeling comfortable going about their lives. But then we'll have a heat wave or a heat event, and we'll have days over 39 degrees in a row. So we might have, say, 4 days of that heat. But you've touched on what's most important about that. One of the most important features of that heat event is that the nights do not cool down. And then on top of that, we have the urban heat island effect. A lot of the time, we're not going to be able to distill what is the difference between climate and urban heat island effect. We've already got heat in Australia. For those that haven't been here before, we're famous for being a hot country, right? It's part of our DNA, it's part of our cultural makeup, but it's changing and we need to be prepared for that. So we know that as a city, we can be anywhere from 4 to 8, if not more, degrees hotter than regions outside of the city centre that have better access to cooler green spaces and water. So that 4 to 8 degrees is significant. And regardless of whether it's climate change or not, we need to be better integrated in planning cooler spaces into our city makeup in order to protect Melburnians.
So just speaking generally, what are the major systems that are exposed to this growing heat or to these heat events? And how does climate change exacerbate the challenges that those systems face?
Climate change is a threat multiplier. I'm sure that you've heard that from people on this podcast before. And if we really look at any of our infrastructure systems, at any of our urban systems, climate change as a hazard and a risk sits on at the heart and as a threat to all of those systems. So it's really important that we are identifying identifying those risks and planning for them in terms of the way that we are operating in the future. And I think just picking out the electricity drawer, we can't air condition our way out of this problem. So I think we really need to be looking at how do we reduce the need for air conditioning, while at the same time recognising that people need access to cool places in order to seek reprieve from the heat. It's an equity issue, so we can't have a system where only the rich have access to air conditioning and the more vulnerable are left to sweat it out. So ultimately that means ensuring that we're building buildings and creating cool spaces across cities for people to go to and to seek that reprieve.
The other one you touched on there, Richard, is the health system. And we certainly have data from heat-related events that show that ambulance call-outs go up. That's one of the major impacts, immediate impacts from heat, is the impact on people's health conditions. It can cause heat stroke, dehydration, heart attack, and obviously, as we've discussed, death. And so, no one needs to die from heat. That's something that we need to be focused on as a community, and that's where our preparedness and communications is really focused.
And speaking of better understanding, preparing, where are urban leaders right now? Like, do they understand these challenges as the threat multiplier grows, or are they still really separating, say, climate, heat from the other real challenges that they have?
Being privileged to work for one of those leading cities that has been working in this space for some time, it's certainly great to be part of networks such as C40 who convene cities around issues of climate. And I think the observation from participating in those global discussions is that it's gone from we need to do this for protection of our community in 10 years to we need to do this for protection of our community today. Just last night, our council agreed to develop a policy that really embeds extreme weather in our decision making for the design of our assets as a formal policy. So yeah, it's not to say that we're certainly there in terms of leadership fully understanding the immediate impacts, but certainly we've come a long way since I think we both started in this space.
If I can follow up that, when you do that, what's the baseline temperature or range that you're now bringing in? Are you planning for well beyond 1.5, or are you just trying to get people to 1.5 because everyone understands, like, that's the common taxonomy that everyone understands at the moment? But how do you address that? And what are the differences that you're seeing when you think about how a city adapts to 1.5, 3, 6 degrees over pre-industrial?
We do have a council endorsed position around our climate change mitigation targets, and they are aligned with the Paris Agreement. So we have modelled our own commitment to achieving a net zero target by 2040, and we have clear pathways around how we're going to achieve that. And that's all modelled on 1.5. Around an adaptation, though, we haven't yet modelled what different scenarios will look like. What we can do is draw on the best available data and resources that others in the field provide us and other agencies provide us. So at the moment, there's a very live conversation around modelling, flood modelling, and understanding flood model depths that we might be facing as a municipality. We also have a legislative responsibility to be planning for climate change. That was included in the legislative framework that we're responsible for in 2020. And so we need to be preparing and planning for that changing climate in, as Krista said, every decision that we make.
And I think, to continue that planning conversation, is really expanding what we consider as what is our critical infrastructure to support the city in this challenge. And that's really where green infrastructure and our urban forest has really played a massive role over the last 15 years in doing that, in that we've really started seeing that infrastructure as part of city assets and things that, we need to protect and enhance. Just as much as a drain or a road, our trees play a critical service and a system service for the city, and therefore we value them and put in manage the budget accordingly so that we continue to enhance and grow our urban forests, so that we're targeting a 40% canopy cover across the city by 2040, which, that's the best form of cooling, really, is having a tree that provides shade and transpires during a hot day.
In terms of, that's a great point. So I was just going to add one thing that is really interesting around planning for that changing climate future is that our urban forestry department, who are just brilliant, some years ago actually worked with university researchers and their own experts to understand what tree species would actually survive in our changing climate in order to hit that 40% increase in tree canopy cover. So looking at the useful life expectancy of our existing tree forest, our existing urban forest, and then how do we diversify the forest, and looking at different trees that might survive and that those that are not going to in that changing climate. So it's really interesting and quite technical work that probably isn't really very well understood or broadly understood.
So then how do you go about developing a strategy for the city in terms of heat, climate change? Like, how often do you do this? Are there certain systems that you're that are consistently focused on? And what's the data that will help you make the case for investments or for the strategy that you're building?
Having evidence-based policy is a key part of our city. And it's both evidence from a perspective of, scientific evidence, research, understanding what the rest of the world are doing, where we sit within that. But also every time we go out to the community and engage on any topic, we collect that knowledge and we've got this great knowledge database of what's important. And climate change is in one of the top three. One of the things that we've been really good at here at the city is having long-term strategies. So having them out to, say, 2040, and then updating them periodically with what we'll focus on in the immediate, council term, next 5 years, so that we've got that horizon planning, but at the same time delivering action now. And it is a challenge to make sure that they are live, not a book sitting on a shelf that, never will be referred to. And that's really about embedding it into our business planning and delivery of each annual plan at the city.
Well, one of the most recent examples of the way we went about strategy, and this recognises that climate change is rapidly it's changing the way that we even have to respond to and go about strategy. So in 2019, when we first started the role, actually, our councillors declared a climate and biodiversity emergency, joining a network of cities around the world. I've forgotten the number, Christy, if you remember it. And then we were required as directors to come back with a management response, if you like. So we came up together with our colleagues and the organisation with a 10-point plan that we have been delivering that really accelerated that strategic response, so that we pulled out all of the essential components from the climate change mitigation strategy, from our adaptation plan, from the urban forest strategy, and agreed on those priorities. And then we were able to accelerate action on those priorities. At the moment, we are working with our colleagues to bring together all of those component parts now of different strategies. And then part of that is really looking to see how do we make strategy a little bit more dynamic so that it's not quite so rigid. So as Krista says, it's not a book on a shelf, but that's something that we all understand, that our community understands, and that we are responsible for delivering, but that can also change as climate change changes our city.
One of the conversations I have regularly is the balance between the short-term visible result, and if I put in this much effort, I get this much impact back, versus investing into the long-term, which is this trend is something that's uncertain, but we need to make investments now to mitigate, create resilience, adapt to. How do you balance the short-term actions versus the long-term? Like, do you try and apply more tactic and emphasis on focus resources on the short-term because that way everyone can see the results more quickly? Or do you say, look, we need to be much more long-term about this, and that's just a slower process for you to embed, align and get the stakeholders to support?
It's a great question. I love the challenge because early in Tiff and my leadership of this function at the city, we prioritised a principle in our work of having impact over doing the easy thing, because we are trying to change systems. You raised, what are the systems that can fail? We're actually trying to change systems of decision making, prevailing systems in society, and intervening in markets that aren't actually working towards protecting the climate. And that's hard, and it needs innovative, creative solutions. But given we work in a political system, we also need to demonstrate, bring our political leaders on that journey and help them understand the need to take that long-term horizon and do the hard work rather than what looks flashy up front, but it won't actually make a change.
I mean, look, it's a tough one, isn't it? It's all about balancing priorities and needs, and that approach that Krista and I and the team have taken around impact over easy has really been helpful. Just the simplicity of the concept, and again, that's because we don't have time to waste. And we have been so fortunate to have the support of colleagues and our city leaders, but also to draw on networks of really inspiring climate ambassadors from around the world to understand where we can have that impact. But we have to do all of it. We have to do short, medium, and long term. Where is it that we're going to have the most impact? We actually talk about our heat response through short, medium, and long term impacts. So short term might be that really probably summer-based approach of communicating with people about their health impacts, about what they can do to look after others, and just about the way they move about the day. The medium to longer term is around the way that we start to deliver infrastructure, look at those interventions that we can make around pop-up cooling relief centres, and then planning the longer-term delivery of the city. So I don't know that we can choose one over the other.
What have you learned through your work about how a city functions that is unique, that you would argue is unique, and through the lived experience that you've had through your positions?
That's a great question. I mean, so much, but I think I'd go back to 3 simple words in that cities are places for people. What happens between the buildings and on the streets is really important, because cities are places for people. Melbourne used to be a place that everyone escaped at 5 p.m. We learnt that we needed to change the city to make it inviting for people. And we still use that concept every day when we're thinking about heat and climate, because when there's an extreme weather event, again, the city can be empty. And so we want the city to be a refuge and a place for people to come and feel safe and healthy, not a place where they need to escape from.
The truth is, as city practitioners, we just have, it's such a brilliant job, and it's probably one of the reasons why we've been here for so long. And you really come to city governance and you come for a career. It's brilliant because you are the level of government that's closest to people and to changing and influencing people's lives, arguably. We're the ones who have the most direct contact. When our councillors have a meeting, the public can just come in here and sit and ask questions, and they're right in front of the councillors who are making the decisions. It's accessible, it's responsive, and we're really making a meaningful difference in people's lives. The other really fabulous part about city government is the collaboration, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, with our colleagues around the world. And I think if you look, you'll find some really fabulous examples from London to New York to Paris, right through Europe and Asia, of truly inspiring programs and policies that are making an impact in people's lives, but also making a big difference to our global efforts to hit the objectives of the Paris Agreement.
If a city were to come to you, and I'm sure that you have cities coming to you, and they're asking, we know we've got a problem, we need to address this. What advice would you give to a city leadership to get started on the path that you guys have already been on for so long?
Everyone understands risk. Every time you walk out the door, you assess, thousands of risks. So doing a risk assessment for your organisation and city, there is knowledge within the organisation of how to think about climate as a risk and how to then measure that, and then how to take action or where to take action. Instead of thinking, I need to employ a whole new team or establish resources, is think about a function that you already have and how it can be applied. And then the other part of that is to develop a partnership with a university, as we've talked about, or someone that has some knowledge, so that it's not about spending money before getting any returns. It's about really understanding where to focus effort before you go down the path.
Something that we've done here at Melbourne is work with a local tech startup to understand our own climate risk. So really understanding where is that greatest risk within the municipality at a granular level. So overlaying actual heat levels across the city, then overlaying the social vulnerability and population data. So that's something that can be quite tangibly brought to life in another city. And then you can understand, where do I need to really double down my efforts and go in and perhaps work with those vulnerable communities. So there are some really simple, effective tools in the toolkit that cities can start employing immediately, so long as they accept that there is a risk and that they have an obligation to respond to that risk.
If you look at your teams, what are the skills, what are the mindsets that, a young professional would require to grow into a leadership position, become a chief heat officer over time?
We often operate in a space of ambiguity. So getting comfortable in ambiguity is a key skill, because there is not a linear path. We don't have the answers. It's often a circular path. You try one thing, that doesn't work. You work with another partner, and eventually you get somewhere closer to where you're going. And it's about being comfortable in the ambiguity is a key part of, I think, leadership in climate change.
And I think also just accept that there's no one career journey into sustainability. I'm a lawyer with an arts background. Krista has a science background. We have people in our team from every walk of life, and that is the fabulous part of sustainability. There are people that have made switches from media and journalism because of that passion that you spoke about earlier. But we need a community of all professions working on this. So don't consider that because you've made one path that you are precluded from working in this space. It's not as complex as it might seem. And then really reach out and look to get some experience.